Okay, so how do you repair relationships? What do you do when things go wrong, either with an individual pupil or with an entire class? Hopefully not. There's lots of things that can be done. In fact, there's lots of things that must be done. And one of the first things that must be thought of is, what are the consequences for these actions? What needs to happen? So for example, if you have got a whole school consequence system, if you have a C1 or a C2, or students are meant to lose golden time, or students are meant to have their parents called home, or have a postcard home, or whatever the consequence for the action is, it's terribly important that you follow that to the letter, unless there's a reasonable exception to be made. The reason why that's important is because you're not just upholding the norm for that child, but also for the entire class. Students need to know that their actions matter, and if that means a mild sanction, then so be it. If you take the sanction away, and you can't run classes entirely on sanction, but if you take the sanction away, then you lose the deterrent effect which might be implicit in that sanction. So try to be as consistent as possible, even if you don't like or feel like giving the sanctions. In fact, particularly even then, because you don't want to come across as unfair to the children by only letting children off because they normally behave well, or perhaps through some kind of invisible bias, you like them more than others. And that would be a dreadful norm to try to communicate to children. So that's the sanction or reward element. But perhaps more importantly is, how do you then repair that relationship? Because the objective of every response from a teacher should be improving the child's behaviour. And a lot of that is going to be through conversational or pastoral methods, which is to say that whenever a student achieves any kind of consequence for their action of whatever type, there must be some kind of restorative process where the aspiration is to reintegrate the child into the classroom, but not willy-nilly, but rather with a greater understanding of where they went wrong, what they need to do to improve, and why they're still valued and why they're still wanted as a member of a classroom. We can reprimand students, for example, for misbehaving, and do so in a positive way. We can say things like, I expect better of you and I know you can do better, and is there a reason why you weren't behaving? And we might start to unpick and unpack perhaps some other deeper reasons why children are misbehaving. They may be being bullied or parents going through divorces at home and so on. That's what we need to try to find out, particularly if there are patterns of misbehaviour. But in the conversation where we reintegrate the child into the classroom, we need to establish those three things. What went wrong, what you can do better, and you are still valued. I want you in the classroom, but I want you to be better. If the child can acknowledge and understand those three things, there is a chance their behaviour will improve. What mustn't happen is the child is simply reintroduced to the classroom environment, because being removed from the classroom environment, being asked to wait outside in a corridor, being given some kind of sanction, is not in itself restorative. It does not cure or improve people. What it tends to do is give the class a respite, which is important, but isn't going to be focused on restoring the behaviour of the student. So give them ways forward. And the time to do this, time to have this conversation, it depends. If the student's misbehaviour is small, if the reasons for it are fairly mundane, like they were just mucking around, then the response and the restorative conversation and the attempt to repair needs to be as quickly as possible. The next break time, the next lunch time, the end of the day and so on. Perhaps even in the class if it's a very small incident. But if the student's behaviour is extreme, or they become very upset, or you've become very upset, then the time to have that conversation is not immediately. Because when people are agitated or upset, or adrenaline's rushing through their system, and when the blood is hot, those are not the best times to have rational, intelligent conversations. Those are the times to think to myself, we need a bit of breathing space, and we need to separate ourselves and allow ourselves to calm down. You cannot control a fire, you can simply contain it and let it burn itself out. And even the most agitated student will calm down, and even the most agitated teacher will calm down. So be aware of you and yourself in this process, and ask yourself, is this the right time for me to have this restorative conversation? But crucially, the conversation must be had. If it's a small incident, it can be a short conversation. If it's a bigger one, it needs to be a long, more extended conversation, possibly using other parties from the school, possibly using people from the student's home as other parties to try to sustain and support the reintegration.